各位还记得北京上空响起的第8届阅兵礼炮吗？一支支新式导弹列队驶过天安门，一面面旗帜重新定义了力量的意义。正有人说，这只是军事的展示，但在新加坡前外长杨永文看来，这背后隐示的是一个更深层次的现实，那就是世界秩序已经不再由7国集团说了算。过去的几十年里，美国一直把自己视为国际秩序的仲裁者，它主导世界贸易组织、国际货币基金组织，甚至北约的战略节奏。然而如今的美国已不再是那一个建立秩序的美国，而是一个开始质疑自己制度成本的国家。当年美国占全球 GDP 的 40%， 它愿意维持体系，输出规则，但现在比重降到 20%， 它开始怀疑这一套规则是否还划算。于是美国优先成为了口号，一种不再掩饰的治理逻辑开始。特朗普与拜登政府的共同点在于，他们都不再追求领导世界，而是直接参与竞争。美国不再试图调解纷争，而是选择站在赛道上，成为竞争者。问题是，当美国放弃调解者的角色，世界的制衡机制也随之消失。今天的多极格局，不是西方主导的多边主义，而是多中心对抗的开始。俄罗斯、伊朗、朝鲜和中国形成了一个松散的战略共识，韩国、印度等国在其中寻找平衡，而新加坡等国只能低调谨慎，在夹缝中维持生存的空间。杨永文特别提到，9月3日的阅兵不只是纪念抗日，更是一场地缘政治的宣言。在北京的广场上，来自哈萨克斯坦、印尼等“一带一路”核心国家的元首到场观礼。这并非是偶然安排，而是中国在告诉全世界，我们并不孤单，我们的网络正在成型。这一种象征式集体亮相，是在向7国传递信息，全球权力正在重新分配，水不会只往高处走。无论美国如何强调民主联盟，全球南方的经济与人口正在形成另一个重心。而与此同时，杨永文也提醒人们，不要把印度和中国混为一谈。李光耀早在多年以前就说过，把印度和中国相提并论，会误导你们对亚洲的理解。印度的增长是有机的、碎片化的，极具地方性。不同邦、不同宗教、不同种姓的结构，使其经济结构充满了变量。相比之下，中国的体制化推进更集中、更快速。因此，中印的崛起虽然同为亚洲现象，但却代表了2种完全不同的国家模式。那让我们看一下视频。
Following China's summit with India and Russia and their 80th anniversary parade with Russia, North Korea and Iran, do you think China and its allies are set for a long-term adversarial stance against the West, or is there still a path to strategic coexistence?
Those images express what is happening in the world today. We're in a great transition to a different kind of world, where the US, instead of holding the ring, has decided that there's little benefit in doing so. It's jumping into the ring itself to be a participant. And the result is consternation everywhere. It used to be, Lee Kuan Yew described the US as a benign superpower. It maintained global rules in international institutions like the WTO. It took the lead. And I was for many years a trade walla. I was involved in trade negotiations. And without the US, we couldn't have made progress. But the US now increasingly feels that the institutions which it helped to create at the end of the Second World War, when it was 40% of global GDP, that these institutions no longer act in its interest, and therefore subverts them when it feels that they should be marginalized, or distorts their operation in order to benefit itself. America First should be an embarrassing phrase. I mean, if you're number one, you never say me first. How can the leader, how can the CEO, how can the boss say me first? Of course we know he's me first, but there is always a dressing up, almost a hypocrisy, which shows your aura, your strength. But now there's no embarrassment. America first. And it says about bullying others. If you're Singapore, well, okay, so it's better for Singapore to stay in the shadow and don't attract too much notice. If you're Panama in the limelight, frankly, you have no choice. Then he thought he could push China. China looked the other way. China could not be pushed. Russia, of course, cannot be pushed. And even India has shown that it will not be pushed. Or Brazil, or South Africa. So Trump will push where he can, will bully whomever he can bully. And the result is a reaction. Global financial crisis 2008. The G7 countries could not generate sufficient demand to pull the world out of a crisis. So George Bush Jr., he convened the first G20 summit. In the following year, Gordon Brown in London got the G20 leaders to coordinate fiscal and financial policy. And China introduced a 4 trillion renminbi budget. And it really spent. In those few years, China poured more concrete than the US in its entire history. It helped to get the world out from the GFC. It could have been much worse. Now imagine today, if there's another global financial crisis, and the liquidity overhang today is much greater than it was in that 2008. The G20 is not functioning because of the Ukraine war. The G7 collective GDP, as a proportion of global GDP, is much smaller. We are in danger. So people are signaling to the G7, you can't decide for the entire world. So BRICS, they are posturing to show that, look, hey, you are not what you were before. The US thought it had India on its side against China. India thought it had the US on its side against China. Then when the Ukraine war broke out, then America found that India is not going to disavow Russia. And after Pahalgam, India realized that America is not going to denounce Pakistan. So now both sides know it's an adult relationship. We get together when it's to our benefit, otherwise we act in our own self-interest. Then on September the 3rd, when China commemorated the 80th anniversary of the end of the war against Japan and fascism, Putin on one side, Kim Jong-un on the other side. But you should pan out a little bit more. It was Prabowo, it was Tokayev. Why Prabowo, why Tokayev? After Tianjin, Prabowo flew back to Jakarta because there were riots. So having calmed it down by facing the media with Megawati, Puan, Surya Paloh and the others, he then flew back to Beijing just for the parade, then flew back to Jakarta. Why did he do that? Because it was important to the Chinese. So these two countries, Kazakhstan, Indonesia, are the two key countries for the Belt and Road. People say, oh, Belt and Road is being de-emphasized. Not at all. Belt and Road is part of this new phase of history. And that was a full display. Prabowo knew it. He knew that it was important to the Chinese. He wants China to help his program for economic development. And it was a display for the world to see, but principally for the Americans and for the G7 countries to see. That was the meaning. We are in a great transition to a multipolar world. And it's not going to go back to the past. Water doesn't flow uphill. What we have to try and figure out is what shape that multipolar world will be.
maybe just a short view on how you see India and the growth. Obviously, we heard that India's population surpassed that of China last year, albeit that the GDP is still at around 4 trillion, which is less than 25% of that of China. But how do you see it shaping global trade relations?
Well, GDP in nominal terms is distorted by exchange rates. IMF last year put out the major economies by PPP. So nominally, the US is about 25 trillion, China is about 18 trillion. But in PPP, China is 40 trillion, the US is 30 trillion, Europe is 20 trillion, India is about 15 trillion. You've got to correct for the fact that with $100, 100 euros, you get much more in China than you would in America or in Europe. In fact, you buy a lot of goods and services with 100 in China, much more than you would in, say, in the West. So PPP is important. And India's PPP will continue to grow. It will grow in a very different way from China. The urbanization rate is still much lower than in China, which is 70%. So India is still very much a rural economy. And if you have a bad monsoon, the GDP is affected. If you have a good monsoon, it gives a big boost to the GDP. And for India, any political party which mismanages rural politics will lose power. And that's the reason why India pulled out from RCEP, because it was very worried about the rural sector. The Indian economy is actually doing reasonably well and better from a year ago. But it's higgledy-piggledy, and it's very different from China. Li Kuan Yew used to say, you should never speak about India and China in the same breath, because that deceives you into thinking that it's kind of a similar kind of growth. India is all over, but it's organic. And if you're in Gujarat, it's Gujarat. If you're in Tamil Nadu, it's Tamil Nadu. They are divided by caste, by language, by different cultures, by religion. Whoever operates in India must be prepared to get their feet wet and understand India, and not think that from behind a screen looking at numbers, they can invest in India. That is very dangerous. If you want to be exposed to India, go to India. Get used to it. Learn to like the place. Then do India. China is simpler, but not that simple either. To think that you can, behind a screen, looking at numbers and alphas and betas, and move assets around, you can do that for Singapore, maybe, Hong Kong, US, Europe, but do that at your peril in Asia. Because in Asia, the numbers do not tell the whole story.